Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Junia Doan's The Spark. I'm Junia Doan. Thank you for joining us. Today, I will be speaking with Charles Kupchan, author of his new book, Isolationism, A History of America's Efforts to Shield Itself from the World. Charles, tell us, what is the thesis of your new book?
Well, the book is a history of American isolationism, and it basically lays out the following argument: that from the founding of the Republic in 1789 until 1941, the United States was basically isolationist. It believed that the experiment in political liberty and economic liberty that the founders had begun and that successive generations had continued required that the United States stand aloof from the world, not expand beyond North America, not go beyond the Pacific coast. Then in 1941, with Pearl Harbor, the country swung to the opposite extreme. It engaged in a level of global ambition and ideological ambition that really continued right through the end of the Obama administration. And what I think President Trump in many ways marked with his America First foreign policy is the beginning of what I would call the third era. And that is a period in which the United States is going to need to find the middle ground between doing too little, which is where it was for much of its history, doing too much, where we've been over the last couple of decades, to that sweet spot, to stepping back, but not stepping away. And I think many Americans, Republicans and Democrats alike, feel that the United States has overreached. They want Mr. Biden to focus on the domestic agenda. So in the end of the book, I call for what I lay out as a judicious retrenchment, trimming our foreign commitments abroad, but staying a country that's still internationalist and engaged in global trade.
When you started with that in mind, who was your audience for this book?
Well, I started thinking about this topic in the 1990s when I noticed that after the fall of the Berlin Wall, coverage of foreign policy in the print journalism area, in the television area, fell off a cliff, and the United States seemed to be losing interest in global politics in the way that it had been engaged since Pearl Harbor, really. And then you had 9/11, and the US becomes riveted on Islamic extremism, wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. But then a reaction to what we now call the forever wars, we began to turn inward again. And that's really when I began to say, you know what? I think Americans need to know much more about the history of the country before Pearl Harbor than post Pearl Harbor. And so I started to read a lot of books about the 19th century, the founding era, the 20s, the 30s. And I have to say, my head exploded because what I was reading bears such little resemblance to the America that I grew up in, the globalist, internationalist America. And that's when I began to realize that the Trump era, the isolationism, the unilateralism, the protectionism, the nativism are very much part of our history. And so I wanted to tell that story so that Americans are more familiar with both their isolationist past as well as their more recent internationalist past.
I thought early on, when the country was founded, of course, it was difficult to get anywhere. But then with planes and later after Pearl Harbor, it was easier. And now we have Zoom and all the rest of it. But I thought that the theory of sending our troops elsewhere was to keep them from coming here by gaining too much strength if we didn't support the local whomever we decided to support. Is that a bad idea? A useful idea? Did it fail?
Well, you're right to point out that the initial attachment of the founders to isolationism stemmed in part from geography. And it was George Washington who, in his farewell address in 1796, said, "The great rule of conduct for our nation should be commercial connections with everyone, political connections with no one." And he said that in part because the founders looked to the west and they looked to the east and they saw big oceans. Yes, at that point, we were still 13 colonies. We hadn't yet expanded to the Pacific, but the Pacific and the Atlantic gave the United States a natural security. And as a consequence, the founders and those that came after said we should bank on that natural security. We should enjoy the unique geographic separation that we have from others. And then when you start to get into the modern age with telegraph, with steamships, eventually submarines, airplanes, that natural geographic security does diminish. You're right about that, Junia. But I think what is still the case is that we have judgments to make. Are we safer when we are at war in Afghanistan and Iraq, or are we safer when we tend our own garden? My own view is we still have important commitments in Eurasia, in Europe, in Asia, because of the rise of China, because Russia is still a troublemaker. But I do think that we have overreached by engaging in wars of choice in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya. And it's now beholden for our leaders to trim those commitments and focus more on our needs at home, especially during the pandemic.
I think people's attitudes toward China, or the leaders' attitude, the elite, is somewhat different. I think earlier on it was, well, if we sort of induct them into the commercial world and prop up their success and, make it easy, and that'll help them and help us. And now we're a little slow to catch up on the intellectual property problem, which we've discussed for a couple of decades now, but we don't seem to handle it either externally with them or internally by training more researchers.
I think you're right that there has been what I would call a wisening up here in the United States when it comes to China. Beginning in the Clinton administration after the end of the Cold War, there was a belief that if we let China into the global trading system and we began to invest in China and trade with China, their middle class would expand and they would liberalize and they would eventually dock in our harbor, to put it euphemistically. Well, what happened is their middle class did explode. They became wealthy. China will soon be the largest economy in the world, but they have not liberalized. In fact, they're going in the other direction. And as you said, they continue to steal intellectual property. They continue to subsidize their state-owned industries. There is no level playing field when it comes to trade with China. And I'm expecting Mr. Biden to follow in the footsteps of Mr. Trump on this front and continue to use tariffs and pressure to get China to liberalize its market and become more of a fair player when it comes to trade. Another issue that we do have to deal with is the cyber threat. China has used penetration of our cyber networks, as has Russia, to steal intellectual property. They've tried to get access to our vaccine information. And so I think one of the new fronts when it comes to security is building more resilience, building more offense and defense when it comes to this new arena of competition on the internet and competition over cybersecurity.
I had read, and maybe you know the answer, that the best people, the top two are not our friends, China and Russia, and the third one is Israel in inability or technique. And yet here we were invaded, or one of our super protector people, I can't call them people, companies, who just hacked the other day. How can we do better?
There are a couple different layers to this problem. One is that what's going on is that our adversaries, Iran, Russia, China, are taking advantage of social media, are taking advantage of our own internal polarization to make matters worse. They are spreading untruths, they are spreading rumors, and they're trying to spin up and divide the American electorate in ways that we need to get a handle on. And that's why we're having a big debate as we speak about whether Facebook and Twitter and other internet platforms need to do a better job of patrolling what they put up and making sure that things that are simply not based in fact are not to their readers. And then the other is that we don't yet really have a code of conduct, a set of rules, whether they be legal or more informal, for dealing with the problem of intrusion into our country through cyber networks. Whether that intrusion is in our election system, whether it is our corporate private secrets, whether it is Wall Street, this is kind of the new frontier. And I think we are investing in this, but there's a lot of work to be done. And part of this is diplomatic. We need to sit down at the table with not just our allies, but also the Russians, the Chinese, and others to say, we have this new area, this new digital zone. How are we going to regulate it in ways that will make us all more secure?
But why do you believe, or do you believe, that they would abide by it? Whoever
well,
they
may not abide by it.
Right.
So far, they generally haven't abided by it. And then we have to have a discussion about two different kinds of responses. One is to play defense. How do you prevent them from intruding into our systems? And part of that is better observation, better ability to see when somebody is trying to hack into a big company, a bank, whatever it may be. And part of it is developing offense. And that is to say, if you do this to us, we're going to do this to you. And one of the things that worked well in the recent 2020 election is that our cybersecurity team actually took the fight to the Russians. They took the fight to others. They went into their systems and took them down before they could come over here and try to interfere in our elections. And so some of this is going to require taking the fight abroad and preventing people from coming here with their hacking and their intrusions.
You know, for some time, I feel too many people are making money with China, that it's hard to get our courage together and focus on the issue and then think proactively. In any case, for some time, you've been writing about managing American decline. Sometimes you say this is an issue. Sometimes you say we can't be talked into it. Now, you know, you're encouraging accepting of that idea. I'm not a sports person, but often in sports, you know, in the last 30 seconds, they kick a field goal, or, you know, they do something that's just from, you know, black swan kind of thing, just out in the open. Do you think the idea of American decline is not only a given, but will happen, bearing in mind that historians are reluctant to make firm forecasts?
You know, it depends on what we mean by American decline. If we mean that the United States will no longer represent the lion's share of global wealth and military capability, then that's inevitable. And that's simply because we see China rising, we see Asia rising up in the ranks. It will probably be the most economically dynamic zone in the world in the next few decades. So there is a redistribution of wealth that's taking place. And that's just the way the world works. If by decline we mean some kind of um, uh, descent in the American experiment, that the United States is losing its mojo, there I would say, no, that's not the case. We are going through a rough patch. And one of the things that I think we need to do is learn lessons from the polarization, learn lessons from the degree to which our democratic institutions have been stumbling, figure out how to make sure that average Americans are earning a living wage, that they believe their kids will have bright futures, that they have economic insecurity. These are the pressing questions of the day. We need to get those questions right. And then the United States will be one of the leading nations in the world, even as we see power devolve to the Chinese and other areas of the world.
I'm surprised by how many people in America don't like America. And yet people who come from outside, whether legal or illegal, they want the chance to be here. And there's just a disconnect in my thinking. How is it that we got, or the people who hate America, how did they get there? You know, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, do we have problems that need to be fixed? Sure. We have rising inequality. We have economic insecurity. We have racial tensions. We have a pandemic that's raging out of control. Nonetheless, when you look around the world, the United States is still looked to as a model. It's still a country that others want to emulate and that others want to come to. And that's because the American experiment, broadly defined, has been successful. We have the best universities in the world. We have the most entrepreneurial companies in the world. We have an immigrant population that continues to replenish itself, to evolve, a young cohort that's coming up. And so we're a dynamic country that's doing well. Let's not lose sight of the strengths of the country. Instead, let's fix the weaknesses. We know they're there. And in particular, I think the economic situation is one that we need to focus on. And we need to make sure that Americans in Michigan, in other parts of the industrial Midwest, need to be beneficiaries of globalization, because in many respects, it's the big multinationals who are thriving on global trade. In our negotiations with China and other trading partners, we need to make sure that small businesses, middle-sized businesses, that everybody is a beneficiary. Otherwise, we will see a continued turn inward and a resentment of globalization.
Do you think there's a chance for reindustrialization in America?
I would say that that number one, we can to some extent recoup traditional manufacturing. And that can be achieved by the renegotiation of trade deals. But the main source of the loss of jobs in the manufacturing sector is technology. It's not trade or immigration. And so I think what we need to see here is investment in infrastructure, in worker retraining, in technology, to develop a new set of manufacturing lines in new areas, in digital technology, in green technology, in healthcare, in digital and data management. These are the growth areas. That doesn't mean we're still not going to build good cars and good generators and good traditional manufacturing products, but the wave of the future suggests that a lot of the manufacturing that does take place will take place in these new growth sectors.
You're very educated, Charles, and obviously bright and determined, but some people don't have your facility and drive. Have you any thoughts of how we could improve the educational system for them?
The priority right now does have to be on domestic investment. And domestic investment means infrastructure like bridges and roadways. And it also means the school system, the public school system. We are no longer one of the leading countries in the world in terms of the quality of education we provide. Our students are no longer testing at the very top when it comes to reading and math. And that's because we simply haven't done enough to keep up with the trends. We haven't done enough to reinvest in our public school system. So along with trying to revive the employment, to trying to get our manufacturing back up on its feet, I think we do need to deal with improving the public education system. And there are also important proposals out there about how to make higher education more affordable, particularly through community colleges and through more assistance for those people who go to four-year colleges.
I've been thinking about this. Germany has a different system, but is college really necessary for a number of people? Is a trade certificate better because it gives them something they can make a living with? And I guess it goes back to new business generation. If we're thinking office jobs, if we're thinking anything that's away from trade or medicine or veterinary or things like that. I have a lot of compassion for people who are struggling in the school system. And as a society, we can't let year after year after year, people grow up and they're not trained to do very much. They can't. Anyway, that's beside the point. That's the other thing, are we really in decline? And, I'm all for pushing the brightest into, more special schools for them, whatever. And so, because they will carry us, the top few percent in talent, drive, and dreams will be the drivers of inventions, research, companies that require the tech that you're commenting, or so it seems to me. And the reason I'm saying this is that you can come back with me with an answer that might be different.
Listen, if you look at the data, if you go to college, you have more upward mobility and your earning potential is higher. And that's simply because you tend to have access to higher wage jobs. That doesn't mean that you don't get good jobs if you don't go to college. You do, but we need to do more to make sure that people who don't go to college, who go to vocational school, who earn a trade, are earning a good living wage. It used to be that many Americans entered the middle class by getting manufacturing jobs, and those manufacturing jobs used to be generally toward the higher end of the pay scale. That's no longer the case, in part because manufacturing jobs have declined. They're only now, I think, about 9 to 10% of the employment structure in the United States, but also because a lot of those people who left manufacturing have gone into service, and service doesn't pay as well as manufacturing.
Henry Kissinger, didn't he in the 70s sort of try and manage decline? I mean, this has been a topic on leaders' mind for some time. If you're going to write a book 5 years from now, what do you think you'll be saying, or 8 years from now?
I think the United States is poised to do extremely well. It's poised to rebound. We have gone through previous periods of trouble, including the Civil War. We emerge on the other end and we thrive. The one thing that I do think we need to get used to is a world in which power is more widely distributed. Instead of pursuing policies in which we're the top dog, we may have to get used to pursuing policies in which we work alongside others as equals. I actually don't think that most Americans have a problem with that. It's just an adjustment. But we are going to be living in a world in which, whether it comes to climate change, nuclear proliferation, cybersecurity, terrorism, we cannot solve the global problems of our day without working with others, and that's going to require partnership.
So one of the things that's on my mind is I happen to like liberty. I don't like people telling me what to do. And when I hear, okay, power is going to get distributed because of economic success of other countries, sounds good to me, as long as they don't come back and say, now you're going to live the way we're going to boss you to live, right? Or tell you to live. And that's just, I wish you'd write a book. How can you have what you really like, but maintain the freedom of the individual, or at least in America? And, humans can be bossy. Have you thought about that at all?
You're referring to an individualistic strain in American political culture. It's always been there.
Yes,
Sometimes we call it unilateralism.
Generations go by, and will it continue?
Well, I think to some extent we have to be a team player. We can't go off on our own. And that's simply because we do live in a globalized world. We live in an
I didn't mean
interdependent
as a country, but I meant that other countries in this power distributed way would let us do our thing, so to speak. And they do many, many flowers in a bouquet. Yeah. Anyway, that's what I'm hoping for. There's something in humans that like to dominate, and so I'm cautious. Anyway, I'm delighted I had the opportunity to talk with you, and it's something to think about, the bigger questions and the bigger results. And I hope you'll continue to write, and I'm interested in the next decade and how it plays out, especially in the virus side and in dislocations around energy and cyber warfare. But anyway, lovely of you to do this. I hope your book sells super well, and people in our area and beyond. As you know, once this is aired, this goes to YouTube and podcasts. So there you are. Thank you again for participating.
Well,
Do something nice for someone you
show.
know and someone you don't know.
It's been a pleasure having the chance to discuss the issues with you today.
To contact Junia, send her an email at juniadonsthespark@gmail.com. For more information, program schedules, and news about future guests, go to www.juniadonthespark.com. Thank you for joining us. See you next time on Junia Doan's The Spark.
Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.